I'll introduce first to give us perspective on the historic perspective of Stony Point, where now we have the Pagtatanim. We have Carlos Ocampo, or Charlie, from the United Church of Australia. He is a lay preacher and a long-time activist. And so he attended the historic Stony Point conference in New York in 1980. So I'll give the floor to Charlie here.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm glad that we're going to be called a historic conference as a life of Filipino in 1983. The Stony Point Conference was held a month after the assassination of Manila Airport. He was assassinated August 23, 1983. The conference was actually supported by the National Democratic Fund and hosted by the American churches in New York. And it was held September 21, 1983. That's the plenary. Actually, the two chairs of the Stony Point Conference were now the late Reverend Richard Woodland from the Catholic Church and Bishop Pagtatanim from the CDC. They co-chaired and we could also see Sister Marianne. This is a picture of gathering of the church leaders coming from the Philippines with the National Council of Churches and the Canadian Council of Churches. You can see some familiar faces of our generation. Well, there are two affirmations from Stony Point that after Stony Point was not a starting point of the perspective of the churches in doing human rights work, but it strengthened the role of the church responding to human rights work as a church. One of the two affirmations would be one, that men and women are created in the image of God with human dignity. So anything that violates human rights and the dignity of people should be responded to by the churches. That's one first affirmation. The second affirmation, which I cannot forget, which helped me on my Ecumenical work, was that the divine Ecumenicism began as unity of the churches. They define Ecumenicism as offering the resources of the faith to the communities of the poor and disempowered. So not limiting the response of the churches in church buildings and in church carrying work, but going to the community, supporting peasants, non peasants, the workers, and the marginalized. So the secular work in the Philippines got strengthened with church support internationally during our time. But during our time, it's easier to ask support from the churches to do human rights work. I don't know what your experience is today, but looking back, the Stony Point Conference really strengthened the work of the church in human rights work. So these are two affirmations that I got from Stony Point. And also, Stony Point defined underdevelopment as a new word for sin. Underdevelopment is a new word for sin. So we need to respond by faith and service to underdevelopment. That's what I'm happy to accept questions. Thank you.
For sharing the historic perspective of the Stony Point and the continued struggle for justice in the Philippines. Now we welcome Yowanda Yonggara, who is the Global Program Coordinator and fundamental lessons of this World Student Christian Federation and the Regional Executive for the Asia-Pacific region. Yowanda is Presbyterian and comes from a long journey that started in 2009 in the Indonesian Student Christian Movement, the JMPKI. Welcome, Yowanda, and thank you for coming here all the way from Indonesia. Thank you for the introductions. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, dear colleagues, friends, and fellow faith leaders. It is an honor to join this gathering on ecumenical perspectives on solidarity, especially as we come together to listen, accompany, and amplify the struggles of the Filipino people. At the World Student Christian Federations, our missions begins and ends with the grassroots. Student, youth, and communities who live closest to the systemic injustice. As a faith-based movement, we are not neutral in the face of oppressions. We believe solidarity must be more than sentiment, it must be incarnational. We believe, just as Christ walked with the poor and challenged the power of his time, our institutions must stand alongside and uplift the oppressed today. Our call to stand with the Filipino people, farmers, fisher folks, indigenous communities, human rights defenders, and church workers emerged from our ecumenical mandate to live out justice, peace, and compassion through meaningful actions. WSCF has responded to this call through both global and regional initiatives. And our 37th General Assembly in Berlin in 2022, WSCF passed a global resolution denouncing Rodrigo Duterte's crimes against humanity. These resolutions, initiated by the Student Christian Movement of the Philippines, which is members of our federation, or SCFP, mark a global, faith-rooted stand against state violence. More than a symbolic gesture, the resolutions become a concrete commitment of the federations to stand alongside the Filipino people in their ongoing struggle for justice and human rights. Next, please. This is the resolutions. Next. Okay. And then we also organize multiple international webinars to elevate the voices of Filipino students, activists, and church workers, connecting their experiences with our global fellowships. Like you see on the slides, we have these two global webinars. First is about the Faithful Unbound, a global ecumenical youth gathering of all human rights in the Philippines. And then the next one, as you can see, two speakers are actually here, Murphy and Chris Caruso, who are talking about the global struggle against authoritarianism, capitalism, and fundamentalism, and how to defend democracy and human rights, where there also Murphy shared about the struggles of Filipino people. And then next, and this is last year in the Philippines. Together, in August 2024, WSCF Asia Pacific convened consultations, capacity building training, and immersions of the human rights issues in the Philippines, with 50 participants from 11 countries, and in partnerships also with UCCP and NCCP. The program combined theological reflections with grassroots immersions. Participants live. This is the advocacy training on human rights issues that we have with all the students from all over the regions. And over there in the picture, you can see three young girls, two of them who had their parents as a political prisoners who shared their stories, and also one indigenous people who also shared the stories. And on the bottom, we can see Murphy, who are also giving a training to the young people on how to become the advocates of the human rights issues. And next slide, please. This is the integrations that we had in the Ramos, Philippines. So the participants live among farming and fishing communities. caused by the empty terra oil spill. And also, next slide please. This is the videos. This is when all the participants visited the Anza, the communities that were being affected by the oil. Sorry for the resolutions. Communities there are doing their daily activities. The Bishop Hall teaches the students on how to get those fishing nets. It also shared the story about what is happening there. This is the Bishop Hall also shares. And then we are also from this meeting building the Asia Pacific Youth Network for Human Rights, a collaborative platform that brings together not only student Christian movement, but also we invite other youth organizations, church-based or otherwise, that are committed to working on human rights issues, including the situations in the Philippines. This is also a part of our effort to ensure a long-term movement building, leadership formations, and faith-through activism among young people in the regions. And the SCMP, as a committed and active member of WSCF, play a vital role in organizing, mobilizing, and taking actions on the ground in the Philippines. Their consistent works in supporting the Filipino people's struggle has been both courageous and inspiring. And whenever they need the strength of global voices, WSCF is always ready to amplify their calls, ensuring that their prophetic witness echoes beyond borders. And this was not an act of charity, it was solidarity in actions. Student and faith leaders learning from and with the people, reimagining together a future rooted in justice. And on September 1st, we closed the programs with a special prayers and feast at Manila during the International Day of Prayer for Justice in the Philippines. Together with the NCCT, we lifted up the Filipino people's struggles in prayer, knowing that when prayer is rooted in justice, it becomes prophetess. WSCF does not operate with fast financial capital, but we are rich in other assets, like a global network, a prophetic voice, access to youth and academic spaces, and deep relationship with national student movement and churches. These are not meant to be preserved, but they must be mobilized for justice. We believe that as a faith-based institutions, we must provide safe spaces and public platform for marginalized voices, uses our credibility to challenge the authoritarianisms and militarisms, invest in critical political and theological educations that disrupt dominant narratives, walk with communities, not just spiritually, but also through strategic and physical presence. And we believe that solidarity must go generations to understand that faith is not separate from politics. It is deeply political. And allow me to share something more personal. When I was first asked to be a speaker at this conference, I was hesitant. I thought, in the presence of so many remarkable organizations and individuals in our church, those who have been walking alongside the victims in the Philippines, who have served as missionaries, who have worked directly with peasants and defenders, what would WSDF possibly have? We are a federation of students. We have limited resources. What weight do we carry? But then, when I arrived here, and I saw not just one, but many inspiring individuals in this room who are at some point in their lives were part of ASEAN. As a matter of fact, Sir Charlie, right, I just told you that I am also a member of ASEAN. See your friends. See, Murphy, we have Christian Busson, Einstein, Beth, and maybe the others who are employed some point of their life who also member of ASEAN. I don't know, maybe they are full stories, but for me, ASEAN was the place where I first understood what is truly meant to be Christians. It was where I learned that being Christians means not only to care, but to act, to pursue peace on earth, not just in heaven, to speak up, organize, and walk with the marginalized. So no, maybe we may not be in the field every day, but we are committed to being beside those who are. We commit to forming a generation of young Christian leaders who will shape the churches and societies with justice and peace at their core. Leaders who carry the struggle further than we can. Because truly, there is no work too small if done with convictions. If we can contribute, so can you. Imagine if all Christians all the world, especially our churches and the leaders, took seriously the call to walk alongside the oppressed and the marginalized. Perhaps then, the visions of shalom on the earth will not remain only a dream, but become a reality that we help to build together. As Micah 6, chapter 8 reminds us, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Let this conference not be a peak, but a beginning. Let it renew our collective commitment to uphold peace, justice, and human dignity, not only in the Philippines, but everywhere that people cry out for liberations. Follow Christ, love thy neighbor, serve the people with honest mercy. Salamat, Yowanda. Amen to that. Thank you for WSDF for the package and your global network for justice contributes to the crucial support for the victory of the people's movement in the Philippines and the Asia-Pacific region. So now next we have Jennifer Philpot-Nissen. Jennifer is a program executive for human rights and disarmament of the World Council of Churches. So Jennifer,
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Bring warm ecumenical greetings from the World Council of Churches. There's other than our senior leadership who would love to be here, but they've just come back from South Africa, where we had one of our main governing body meetings over the last couple of weeks. So they sent me something instead. I'm sorry about that. Just to give a little bit of our history of the World Council of Churches. In the continuing search for Christian unity, the leaders of more than 100 churches voted to found the World Council of Churches in 1937, but its inauguration was delayed until 1948 following the outbreak of the Second World War. Since then, a growing number of churches on every continent have joined the World Council of Churches, and it's now a fellowship of over 350 churches from more than 120 countries, representing an estimated 580 million Christians worldwide. I can't give the exact number of churches today because just last week I was meeting in South Africa be updating that information soon, but I think it was about 346. So the Commission on the Churches on International Affairs predates the World Council of Churches, and then it dates back to 1946, after the Second World War, where there was an urgent need for a coordinated ecumenical response to the emerging global challenges, including the threat of the conflict between superpowers. So this commission was established while the World Council of Churches was still in the making. And since its creation, the Council and its commissions have supported and inspired church participation in struggles for justice and peace around the world. So we have a long history of involvement with the struggle of Filipino people for justice, peace and democracy. Throughout the period of the military dictatorship of the late President Marcos, the Council accompanied the churches and people of the Philippines in their struggle for human rights. From September 72 to January 81, when it was under martial law, and the Philippines was under martial law, the Council followed with deep sorrow and concern the reports of hundreds of people who were extrajudicially executed, and many others, including church leaders, human rights activists, students, teachers and workers who were unlawfully detained and tortured or disappeared under police or military custody. We supported the National Council of Churches in the Philippines to organise massive international ecumenical solidarity with churches and church-related human rights and peace organisations, and brought the situation of massive human rights violations in the Philippines to what was then the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, the predecessor of today's Human Rights Council, drawing attention internationally for the first time to the horrendous situation prevailing in the country. One such example is the oral intervention in March 1984 by WCC's Commission of Churches to the Commission on Human Rights, explaining in detail the abuses the Filipinos were facing and informing the UN about the life and witness of churches in the country continuing to carry out. These solidarity efforts from the NCCP, which we endeavour to support, were instrumental in strengthening people's struggle for an end to military rule and transition to a form of democracy dedicated to the protection of human rights and negotiated peace. The peace was regrettably short-lived, and I found a message in our archives from former WCC General Secretary Conrad Reiser to the 16th biennial General Convention of the NCCP in 1993, recognising the tireless efforts of NCCP and the churches in the pursuit of peacemaking ministry and advocating for the removal of the root causes of conflict. In the later periods, the Council continued to accompany the NCCP during ongoing periods of instability marked by serious human rights violations, including through statements denouncing the inhumane acts such as those perpetrated by the Abu Sayyaf group, which repeatedly held children, teachers and foreigners as hostages, calling on the parties to cease hostilities and return to the negotiating table. And the statements at that time also started to call for ecology and economic justice as well. 3 years after President Duterte came to power and began war on drugs, the representatives of the government of Iceland in Geneva reached out to the World Council of Churches in 2019 to help them gather enough political support to table a resolution in the Human Rights Council to condemn the atrocities being committed and to take action to stop the killings. Iceland had only just become, or the year before, had become one of the 47 member states of the Human Rights Council because the US had given up its seat when Trump came to power while Trump took them out of the Human Rights Council the first time, he did it the second time. And this left a vacancy which Iceland was elected to fill. For several weeks we worked with Iceland, encouraging and supporting our member churches around the world to call on their governments to support this resolution. Now, of course, many governments did want to see such a resolution adopted because of their own leaders being scrutinised about their national human rights situation. They lobbied hard against the proposed resolution, using their favourite argument about non-interference with the country's national sovereignty, which we hear all the time in the Human Rights Council. Others wouldn't vote for such a resolution for other political reasons, and we heard yesterday from Drew about the joint military programs with the Philippines for regional peace and security. So finally the resolution was watered down during the negotiation process from the original ambitions of Iceland that a high-level commission of inquiry might be established, and it was eventually presented with a request for the High Commission for Human Rights to prepare a report on the human rights situation in the Philippines. The resolution went to a vote and was successful by a very narrow margin. And a year later, in 2020, the report from the High Commissioner was presented, calling for ongoing investigation of human rights situations. But during this year, the political situation in many countries had changed, and this narrow margin of support for such scrutiny that we've seen in 2019 is now unfortunately lost. So a second resolution was adopted, but this time it only called for the Office of the High Commissioner to offer technical support to the government in its efforts to address the dire human rights record. So this meant that the UN was only mandated to advise the government on human rights initiatives and actions, rather than to investigate. So we're currently in a situation where the world's attention is focused very much on the situation in the Middle East and the Russia-Ukraine war. And we see that the conflicts in Sudan and Congo largely forgotten, and the situations of widespread human rights abuses, such as in the Philippines and also in West Papua, struggle to get any attention at the international level. So this meeting is so important to bring us together to strategize on the next steps for advocacy and to demonstrate our ongoing solidarity with the people of the Philippines. In conclusion, I'd like to share my own experience working alongside NCCP and other partners from the Philippines. I joined the World Council of Churches in 2017, just in time for the March session of the Human Rights Council. Now, a key part of my role was to coordinate, facilitate, accompany, encourage, advise, train churches and other ecumenical partners to engage in the human rights system. But from that first March Council session and every session since, it has in fact been a delegation from NCCP and their partners who have coordinated, accompanied and trained me on how to do this job. They have always been the standout delegation in terms of their knowledge, efficiency, organisation and coordination in their advocacy. I do recognise that this precious experience has been gained from a place of much personal suffering and pain. So we pray for and we look forward to the day when there is real peace and democracy in our country, and you can apply the rich set of skills that you have acquired to helping others around the world as they continue their struggles against repressive political regimes. Thank you.
Jennifer, thank you. The World Council of Churches has been beside and behind the Filipino people's movement for justice and peace for the last decades, and you have not faltered. Salamat. Now, to complete this speakers, Father Aris Miranda. Father Aris is a religious priest of the Ecumenical, a Catholic religious congregation whose main ministry is service of the sick persons. He is currently the executive director of the Ecumenical Disaster Service International, or Aris. It's a humanitarian mission office and the social arm of the Ecumenical congregation. He is a member of the Promotion of Church People's Response, PCPR Europe, and the Migrante Roma, member organization of Migrante International. Father Aris.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you for having me. Dear sisters and brothers and honors in faith, all who share deep concern for justice and compassion. Mabuhay. I stand before you today with a deep sense of urgency, not just political, not just social, but profoundly evangelical. The Philippines is a country of immense faith and resilience, but also profound inequality. We are proud to claim as the most Christian Catholic country in Asia. However, I was wondering what happened to those strong religious values, evangelical values of our people, where we're still sitting with gross perennial situation of injustices and state of peace. This brought me to the margins and peripheries of life, where I met not only problems that our fellows live, but also the solutions that hail from their consciousness of what it should look like to live in a democratic society. When I was still in Marikina, Metro Manila, from 1986 to 2004, I was exposed to the slums along the North Marikina River, where the settlers were unjustly evicted by the then Mayor Yowanda Fernando, without giving them safe relocation areas. In 2004, I was about to summer his criticized by my superior at the height of the militarization of the boxer called Colonel Rubito Alvarado during the regime of Gloria Macapagal. 2 years after, when Bishop Aris Miranda was the conference minister of the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, was assassinated in his home, whom I worked with side by side for 2 years in the campaign against mining militarization in Samar and Leyte. I was again moved by my superior to Rome. As we have heard yesterday, all roads lead to Rome. That's First, we gather today to reflect on the fundamental aspect of our Christian calling, one that echoes through the Gospels and resonates profoundly within the unique context of the Philippines. The imperative for our churches and church institutions to focus on the margins, to unequivocally use their immense support for the poor and oppressed communities among us. This imperative is not merely a suggestion, it is a direct outgrowth of our rich tradition of Catholic socialism. Yesterday there was a question of how do we mobilize the church? And somebody was saying, I think it starts from educating. Let's educate the church. The Philippines, a nation deeply rooted in Christian faith, yet grappling with persistent poverty, inequality, and various forms of oppression, we see it in our sprawling urban slum, in our marginalized indigenous communities, in the daily struggles of our farmers and fisher folks, in the injustices faced by the victims of violence and discrimination, and in the mass migration of our compatriots, hoping to provide a brighter future for their children. Here in Italy, there are almost 280,000 Filipinos. They are the ones who transport the ones left behind. Those who dwell at the margins of the society, often unseen and unheard. At the heart of every challenge lies the fundamental principle of human dignity. Every person, this is one of the main points of this whole point. Every person, regardless of their circumstances, is created in the image and likeness of God, possessing inherent dignity and worth. When poverty dehumanizes, when injustice is crossed, when exploitation diminishes, the very dignity of the human person is violated. Pope Leo XIV echoes this vision of the church in his address to the papal representatives for the nuntios, saying, the church is always ready for everything out of love, that she is always on the side of the last, the poor, and that she will always defend the sacrosanct right to believe in God, to believe that His love is not at the mercy of the powers of this world, but rather is traversed by a mysterious being. Only love is worthy of faith. In the face of the suffering of the innocent, the crucified today, who are victims of violence and injustice, or even the false well-being that deludes and disappoints. While our churches stand as beacons of hope and spiritual solace, their mission extends far beyond the four walls of our sanctuaries. It extends to upholding the sacred dignity behind the stomach, the displaced family, the voice of the concerned progressives, silenced by injustice, and the spirit burdened by his fear. What is the core of our mission as a church people? There are different principles, but these are what we call in the Catholic the best kept secret of the church. Because we have it, but we don't speak it in the culture. Preferential option for the poor and the most vulnerable. The Catholic Church is not new to this goal. From the Gospel of the Acts to the Acts of the Apostles, we see how Christ consistently moved toward the very thing. He touched the leper, ate the tax collectors, spoke with the Samaritan woman, and defended a loveless woman from stoning. He did not build walls around the righteous. He walked into the lives of the broken. In the Philippines, the broken are not hard to find. And we have here people who walk with the broken. Almost all of us. And I remember the rural missionaries in the Philippines. I've been working with them in northern India, in Bohol, in Cebu, in other places. Of course, our organization, Aris, is also sometime 2 years ago, became also popular in the eyes of the Ecumenical, where it was mentioned in one of the articles as financing the reason. Caritas, the social action of sinners, the justice and peace. The churches, we have a lot of all these arms that we can have and really work with the poor. Our Christian faith through the lens of practical social justice offers an ambiguous mandate, the preferential option for the poor and vulnerable. Still, when there is a question of defending the rights of individuals, the poor and the badly off have a claim to special consideration. The richer class has many ways of sharing their souls and stand less in need of help from the state, whereas the mass of the poor has no resources of their own to fall back and must chiefly depend upon the assistance of the state. And this is a famous quotation from Beth Dollaga. This isn't just about charity. It is a profound moral test of our society and of our faith. As Pope Francis reminds us, without the preferential option to the poor, the proclamation of the gospel of grace being is understood or subverts. The church constantly prioritizes the needs of the poor and vulnerable in our decision making, our resource allocation, our advocacy. It means looking at every social issue through the eyes of those most affected by injustice and ensuring that their voices are heard and their rights are protected. Now, let me just refresh to the basic and fundamental principles that all of us believe, and even non-Christians, the principle of solidarity. Solidarity is not just simply a faith of vague compassion or shallow distress at the misfortune of so many people, both near and far. On the contrary, it is a firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common. And that is what solidarity is all about. It's not just simply giving food, water, medicines, but more than that, it is journeying with people, building their capacities, and accommodating both love towards their full liberation. Remember, we are just one human family, interconnected and interdependent. The suffering of one is the suffering of all. Solidarity demands that we stand side by side with them, sharing the burdens and actively working for their liberation. It's a firm, persevering determination to commit oneself to the common. And we always hear about those who own good. And what is that open good is all about? It is the sum total of social conditions. Sum total. It's about people, either as groups or as individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily. This principle asserts that the fruits of creation are intended for all and not only to the few. We should remember that. Everything in this world belongs to all of us and not just only to the few. But a lot have already forgotten even the church people. When the best necessities are denied to many, while few accumulate vast wealth, the common good is severely undermined. Third, participation. This is first essentially a series of activities by means of which the individual, either as an individual or in association with others, whether directly or through representation, contributes to the cultural, economic, political, and social life of civil community to which he belongs. Everybody has a part, and no one should be left behind. So from this, how are we going to move? And this is, I would say, and we always recommend, first, go to the very place. Listen more than doing and accompany. Leave out the option for the poor by being genuinely present in marginalized communities. It must be visible in our budgets, in our pastoral priorities, and in our presence. If the poor do not feel that the church is their home, we have failed. Second, advocate for structural change. We know for a fact that the problems that we are facing are not just mainly out of faith or whatever it is we call it, but there is a structure that perpetuates these injustices. The cross is not an optional discipleship. If we do not risk anything for the gospel, we must ask ourselves, are we still following Christ? Third, empower through education and sustainable development. We have heard this yesterday. Fourth, practice ethical stewardship and accountability. Ensure that the church's vast resources, financial, human, and moral, are used transparently and strategically to serve the common good, with a clear focus on those who most need. Friends, in the end, to focus on the margins is not just about doing more. It is about becoming more like Christ. Let us therefore, with renewed commitment and courage, embrace our sacred duty. Let us be a church that truly embodies the preference and option for the poor, fostering solidarity, striving for the common good, and empowering every person to live with dignity God intends. In doing so, we not only serve our fellow human beings, but also become true instruments of Christ's love and justice in our beloved nation. Thank you.
Amen to that, Father Aris. And salamat again for sharing your insights with us, which is the core teaching of the church people on the preferential option of the poor and the principle of solidarity towards full liberation. And thank you to our dear speakers too for enlightening us with such perspective. Now it is clear to us, hopefully, that being in solidarity